From reaching a consensus with the United States to maintaining constructive and stable ties with Japan. The Chinese president's diplomatic push at the APEC summit in Gyeongju, South Korea continues. Today, he met Japan's new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi in their first meeting since she took power.
中方愿同日方一道，按照中日4个政治文件确立的原则和方向，共同维护双边关系政治基础，推进中日战略互惠关系，致力于构建契合新时代要求的建设性、稳定性的中日关系。
中国は日本にとって重要な隣国でございます。日中両国は地域と国際社会の平和と繁栄という重要な責任を有しております。戦略的互恵関係の包括的な推進と建設的かつ安定的な関係の構築という日中関係の大きな方向性を改めて確認したいと考えております。
Xi Jinping also meeting the Canadian Prime Minister in their first formal discussion since 2017. The Chinese leader said relations had shown recovery and invited Prime Minister Mark Carney to visit China. The Chinese leader earlier addressing the APEC summit with US President Donald Trump, choosing not to attend. Mr. Xi pledging a defense of global free trade and outlined a 5-point plan for more inclusive and open Asia-Pacific economy. Let's go to CNA's Tan Si-hui. Now she is joining us from the APEC summit in Gyeongju in South Korea. Si-hui, Mr. Xi there in his speech repeating a position that China has held, not just from the president, but every official that has delivered a speech on this topic. China as a defender of global free trade, a rules-based global free trade. How has that message been received?
Well, China is really taking center stage at this year's APEC summit with the absence of U.S. President Donald Trump at the main leaders summit. Now, he had called on countries to safeguard multilateralism and to maintain stable supply chains. And he gave this reassurance saying that China will remain open to the rest of the world. And this just comes after his meeting with Mr. Trump, where both sides had agreed to dial down tensions and they had agreed on certain outcomes such as suspending the restrictions of rare earth exports as well as cutting down some tariffs for Chinese goods.
I think the messaging from the PRC would be something they've been doing for a while, is to put themselves across as a stabilizing force, as trying to or desiring to work together with others for greater stability and prosperity. That having been said, there will be, of course, doubts about how far the PRC can carry forward on this, given their own domestic economic weaknesses at this point.
Well, China had announced a new 5-year plan promising high-quality growth built on high-tech as well as self-reliance. But all of this is really challenging amid tensions with the U.S.
All right, Si-hui, what President Xi says at the main delivery, that of course matters for the larger audience. But of course, events like the APEC summit, also a chance for China to re-establish, to rebuild, to reassure other countries, such as, in this case, Japan and Canada. He's met Japan's new prime minister. And in fact, we said the last meeting with Canada since 2017, this is his first meeting with Mark Carney as prime minister. So what has come out of Chinese meetings with Japan and Canada?
Well, these meetings are very significant. Let's start with his meeting with Japan. You know, Mr. Xi had said he wanted to develop relations with Japan on the right track, and to do so, they will maintain communication to advance ties. And this comes just as there were expectations that there would be a frosty discussion, tough discussions between the both of them, especially since Mr. Xi had not congratulated the new PM on her new appointment just before this meeting. meeting due to controversial views on Taiwan as well as Japan's wartime history. Now, observers say that likely both leaders recognize that volatility benefits no one, and so they want to start off on the right track, and so they are prioritizing pragmatism. But again, when we come back to how they were performing towards each other, it appears that actions matter more than what was being said, as neither of these leaders had smiled at each other even as they were shaking hands. And so it was telling during a press conference by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi with Japanese reporters. She said that while both sides had confirmed that there is a mutually beneficial strategic relationship, she still holds some concerns, and this includes the Senkaku Islands, or it's also called Diaoyu Islands according to the Chinese. There are also concerns about tensions in the South China Sea, and so all of these regional hotspot issues, she said that there are still some of these concerns, and so there needs to be some time to assess whether such warming of bilateral ties will persist even after the APEC summit. Now, meantime, Mr. Xi had also met Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and he had said that both countries have shown a recovery, and also said that China is willing to work with China to bring back Canada to bring back relations to the right track. And he had invited Mr. Carney to China, which Mr. Carney had accepted. So this really shows a significant turnaround in relations, especially what we've seen just 3 years ago. And so overall, at this APEC summit, it shows that Mr. Xi has really dialed down tensions with many countries, but it really is, we really have to take time to see if such warming of ties will continue.
Thanks to CNA's Tan Si-hui. They're also reminding us that over and above visual readouts, body language also matters. It's Tan Si-hui, they're live from Gyeongju, South Korea. And CNA senior correspondent Lim Yoon-suk is also in Gyeongju. Yoon-suk, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung set for talks with the Chinese president tomorrow. What will they be talking about?
Well, yes, they are scheduled to meet tomorrow afternoon here in Gyeongju, and it's going to be at the National Museum, the same place where President Lee Jae-myung met with U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, this encounter between the two sides is going to be very closely watched, as the two leaders are going to try and reset relations that have been strained after the deployment of THAAD here in South Korea by the United States. Now, this THAAD was supposed to be something that was put here in South Korea to intercept North Korean missiles, but it did trigger this fury from Beijing, which saw those systems radar as a potential threat to its own security. Since then, relations have never really fully recovered between the two sides, and currently South Korea says that, there are even restrictions on Korean pop culture and entertainment, and so it's very likely that the two sides would be addressing these issues. And in fact, South Korea wants to do that because in recent weeks, South Korea has taken steps to try and diffuse some of that tension between the two sides, like easing visa restrictions for Chinese tourists. And South Korea is hoping that China will also come forward. Officials here are also saying that President Lee Jae-myung plans to call for Beijing support in easing tensions here on the Korean Peninsula and encouraging Pyongyang to return to dialogue.
Yoon-suk, of course, South Korea, the host of this APEC summit, and therefore keen that the Gyeongju declaration due out tomorrow, there will in fact be this declaration. Are there any points of disagreement?
Well, I think the leaders here, and especially South Korean president, is hoping that they will be able to get that declaration. But right now, there is some worries that, they might not be able to reach that because, the APEC leaders meeting has wrapped up its first day of talks here in Gyeongju. But what we're hearing, and the foreign and trade ministers in South Korea had earlier said, was that there seems to be this dispute over the wording of that statement. It's unsure right now if they were able to reach any kind of a deal, but apparently there's this phrase, free trade, which apparently the United States doesn't want to be included in that statement, while the other economies here have said that they wanted it included. And so it's uncertain whether they will have this Gyeongju declaration, but many analysts here are saying that South Korea, as hosts of this APEC, is hoping that they will be able to come up with that declaration. South Korean officials here have said that they'll be working waiting until the last minute to come up with that. And so all eyes will really be on whether South Korea and all the other economies will be able to reach a consensus and have that Gyeongju declaration, because South Korea does want that to be there, and so that they can end this APEC and call this a successful APEC meeting here in Gyeongju.
Oh, thanks. That's CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk reporting live for us there from Gyeongju in South Korea.